Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Antonio Perez. I'm part of the BrainPOP Educators team. I'm the Educators Coordinator, and today we'll be doing our weekly webinar with game design with the Game Jam Guide. And with that, we're gonna begin, and we're gonna go to our first slide, and we want to introduce Kevin.
Hey everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Antonio. So my name's Kevin Miklasz. I work here at BrainPOP. I'm happy to talk to you about the game design programming I've been doing as a side project to some of the work I've done at BrainPOP. So I'm the Senior Director of Data and Prototyping Lab here at BrainPOP, and looking forward to talking to you. And next, I'll let Matt introduce himself.
I'm Matt Farber. Anyway, I'm an assistant professor of technology, innovation, and pedagogy at the University of Northern Colorado. I'm a former classroom teacher. I taught middle school social studies for 9 years. I'm a certified BrainPOP educator. And in addition to the curriculum guide that we're going to speak about today, I wrote Gamifier Classroom, which is in a second edition. And I have an upcoming book, Game-Based Learning in Action, that will be out in within the month or so, which is a deep dive into how an expert affinity group teaches with games. And James Paul G. wrote the foreword, and well, I know at least a couple of the attendees here, like Bron, is featured in the book. So that's a little bit about me, and I will now throw it over to Alex.
Hello. I guess I'll advance the slide. Hi, my name is Alex Fleming. I'm a learning design manager at Mouse. Mouse is a national youth development nonprofit focused on using technology with purpose, and we are the current curriculum provider for the Games for Change Student Challenge this year, which is a challenge taking place in New York and Los Angeles for young people in middle and high school to create different games about different serious issues, ranging from kindness and empathy to wildlife conservation to news literacy. I've been with Mouse for 7 years now, teaching game-based learning with the MOVEABLE Game Jam that we'll talk about, and also I've been heavily involved in creating the serious game design curriculum that we use with the Games for Change Student Challenge.
To start, I wanted to give a little background about what the MOVEABLE Game Jams are. This is an initiative that we've been doing in New York City as part of the New York Hive, and recently in this last year we've joined up with the Games for Change Student Challenge. This is something that's been going on since 2014. It's been an after-school game design program for kids, basically. A few facts about the MOVEABLE Game Jam. So far, this is a highly collaborative initiative. So we've had 25 different organizations, primarily after-school organizations, but a few schools too have all participated in these events and have helped contribute curriculum and helped bring youth and have hosted the events. We've held 19 different events in 4 different cities. This is in part where the name MOVEABLE comes from. It's movable in that there's a general format. We can move that format to different times, different places with different people and still be running this Game Jam event. We've developed 54 short hour-long game design activities, which we'll talk more a bit a little later as we go through the presentation, and we've reached over 600 youth. The goals of the MOVEABLE Game Jams. So what are these? What are we trying to accomplish with this? The main goal is really that we want to allow middle and high school youth without any prior game design experience, so really beginners, to engage in a meaningful learning in 3 hours. So this is maybe an ambitious goal to take total beginners and engage them in a meaningful learning activity in a very short period of time. But that was the challenge we were primarily trying to solve with this. We really wanted to teach systems thinking and other kind of 21st century skills. We weren't trying to teach game design in and of itself or coding either. Coding was something we often taught, but it wasn't the only thing we taught. We really saw coding as a means to an end to achieving these other kind of metacognitive teaching goals. We really also wanted to encourage what we called collaborative knowledge building between everyone that participated. So as I said, we had a lot of different organizations participate. Typically, we'd have 4 different organizations collaboratively running any individual game jam event. And that was a chance for the organizations to learn from each other and how they were able to best do things or do things in different ways. Which I think can also translate. We've had some teachers participate too, and this is maybe another way of describing what would be a collaborative peer-to-peer professional development opportunity, where you can learn from each other. You don't always get to look into each other's classrooms, but if you're in the same place running activities, you can kind of share knowledge with each other. And so it's been really useful for those running this too.
The most recent iteration of the movable game jams took place in the 2017-2018 school year. And these were 4 official events. The first one was general game design. 3 subsequent ones aligned with Games for Change and their student challenge. There is a 3rd year of the student challenge this year, which has different themes, and that's on Games for Change's website. I know we mentioned Games for Change earlier without explaining what Games for Change is, and in our little filter bubble, we just assume everybody does. But Games for Change is a very large nonprofit that celebrates games that are about social impact and social justice, games for good, games that address real-world issues, and they're most known for their Games for Change festival that takes place every year, and it's a who's who of game designers as well as educators and aspiring game designers as well. So it's a terrific conference and event held in New York every year, and there's also Games for Change Europe. So we themed to align with these 3 themes: future communities and climate change and local stories and immigrant voices. And these actually also had 3 different sponsors. So Future Communities was sponsored by Current by General Electric. Climate Change, we had people there from NOAA, the weather agency, as well as NASA. And Local Stories and Immigrant Voices was another grant that Games for Change received from the National Endowment of the Humanities, which has been a long supporter in the games and learning space, going back to the Mission US history simulation games for PBS, all the way through to Tracy Fullerton's Walden a Game, and they're one of the lead sponsors there. And this next slide was one of the flyers that was given out, although it's not entirely accurate in some of the orders and locations, but it gives a general idea of how it ran last year, moving from the Bronx to the Museum of the Moving Image to Brooklyn College, and the 4th event was actually at the New York Public Library. And the way these events ran was you would have 4 different sponsoring organizations there, like Mouse or Institute of Play or Coder Dojo, Global Kids, and they ran different breakout stations that students would self-select and join. And coming from my education background, my teacher background, we were very wary, as Kevin was saying, to make this just about coding or game design, because all of those words really are loaded. Kids will hear a word like gamer or science or STEM or writing or art, and they already have opinions of where they fall in those interest spectrums. So we tried to take the literature on informal learning spaces, the Homago framework of hanging out, messing around, and geeking out, and really try to apply that here, because this is an after-school, out-of-school program where people are volunteering and electing to spend an entire Saturday with us. But as we discovered, this model also works in a classroom, especially in a project-based learning space. So I'll start here and hand it back over to Alex. This is a slide, an image of the iterative design cycle from the Institute of Play. And, with any good design, you start out with empathy for the user, the player, the end recipient. So, when you're making a game themed on a serious topic, it involves this extra layer of role play. So you have to consider the end user and you're putting yourself in this role. And, it all really begins with empathy. And I know Alex has done quite a bit of work on this with Mouse, so I will let him continue.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Yeah, Mouse has another program that we run called the Design League program, and this program it's really for an advanced group of high school students who apply for it. But I think it's pertinent to bring up because the focus of that program is human-based design and designing with empathy, and it's a really big part of their process as they go through a design process that looks very similar to what you see here. With the creation of ideas or goals and brainstorming them to build some sort of prototype, which is then tested, and at which point you receive feedback, which is then applied, and then you reflect on those changes. And this is sort of one full loop of the iterative design process. But the empathetic portion of that is really crucial and requires a certain amount of pause before even getting started in some of the other elements of design. Some of the students who work with the Design League program go through a period of what we call no ideas, actually, for the beginning of their design process, where they are forced to do nothing but research and speak with and empathize with the people that they are creating projects for. So usually the kind of projects that Design League works on are adaptive technology projects, not necessarily games. We work a lot with Adapt, and which was formerly United Cerebral Palsy, to create, for example, a game controller that someone who has limited mobility with their hands would be able to use, because it's a pillow that goes around your neck and is sensitive to the direction you move your neck in. And this process usually starts with interviewing folks who have this condition, and just listening for a really long time before even starting to put the pen to paper with ideas. And then after all this empathy has been generated, then we can start to move forward and think about how can we start to build something. But it's so important to not let your own preconceived ideas of what the situation is define things. Is there anything else design process that I missed, Matt?
No, but I should say in the classroom, in a different setting, in my research of teachers who use games in the classroom, sometimes when you play a game, even if it's a card game, let's say, or you play a video game like an iCivics game about U.S. government, or even Oregon Trail, the classic game, right? It might take one class to do that. And that's using the game as a text, like a digital text. And then what you would do, and this is what this program did also in our game jams, where students would play and learn about games first, is then you'd have the opportunity to make a game. And in that sense, students would make a game that could be a sequel. It could be a game from another perspective, like the Oregon Trail from a Native American point of view. How would that look? And that really forces that issue of empathy. It's not so different than what many teachers do if they have students write a journal from somebody who's in World War I to try to empathize with that soldier, and they write from that perspective. So designing games using templates and simple and free game design tools, students can then create sequels or different perspectives, almost like fan fiction, except the game way of doing it.
Great.
So we'll go to the next slide. You want to go over the format?
Yes, please.
Awesome.
Thank you again, Matt. So this is the general outline for how movable game jams have been done. The first two items. Well, the first item is a theme presentation, which was done by the different partners who were involved with the Games for Change Student Challenge with those 3 different topics. So this would be an opportunity to talk about, first of all, to start building empathy, and to for participants to learn about the subjects that they were going to be making games about. This is optional. It's not required for a Movable Game Jam, but it definitely has a lot of benefits, especially if your goal is to be able to create games that have some sort of social impact purpose. And it really helps kind of seed all the participants with ideas about how to make something purposeful and meaningful. After that, if you do choose to have theme presentations, we'd have some sort of lunch or a catered snack. Then the more sort of game-focused portion of the day would start with some sort of introductory game jam activity, usually hacking or modifying an existing game as a large group. And this would be something that would make sure that everyone who attended was on the same page with basic game design vocabulary and basic concepts of what is a game and how can someone modify it or remix it easily. After that larger activity, we would go into 2 separate open design time sessions. This would be the time when a young person would go around the space, find a table or an area where there was an activity that was of interest, and then do that activity. They could either stay for the full 50 minutes or move on to another activity. This wasn't rigidly enforced, though it was encouraged for folks to at least to try an activity, and see if they want to stick with it. And then we would have a 10-minute break to try and make sure that folks tried at least 2 activities, though, again, these were suggestions and not necessarily required. So if you did want to just work on one project the whole time and had really deep engagement with that, that's perfectly okay. Finally, we would prep for a share out and do a survey to get information on how the game jam was received and what ways to improve it would be. And then finally, we would end with some form of share out. These would change depending on the kind of environment, like what kind of location we were able to have the game jams in. Sometimes it would be more of a presentational sort of show and tell style share out. Sometimes it'd be more sort of like a science fair where attendees would stand by their projects and have folks go from table to table, trying out different games, looking at the different work that attendees had done. And that really depends on what was the best fit, depending on the kinds of projects that were there and the kind of space that we had. Thank you.
So, yeah, so here's an example. The next couple of slides, I'll go through a little quicker. This is from Current by General Electric, and we try to encourage, or we definitely do encourage, that the content part, which comes first, where students learn about what they're going to make games about, is also interactive, is also one where it's not sit and get learning for 2 hours. And of course, in a classroom, this could be covered in maybe 1 or 2 class periods where there is some sort of physical or making or inquiry-based activity. So this is one where students were envisioning future technologies in a smart city, which all came together as a very interesting tactile puzzle. The next slide is from the event at the New York Public Library, and historians brought in actual artifacts from the New York Historical Society and Brooklyn Historical Society, and then students went on a inquiry-based lesson to try to figure out what these objects actually are or were. The one right here held in front of these 2 students, that's a button hook, which was used to go through jackets and shirts to pull buttons through. And it's an obsolete technology now, But, as you might imagine, the guesses students had what this hook actually was quite amusing and quite engaging also. It wasn't as if we had students for an hour and a half or 2 hours watching PowerPoints on, the history of New York. And another piece here is that students at this point will start to work together. They start to work in teams, and they look through a handout. These children here are looking at a box that was stamped from King George from the Stamp Act in the 1700s, right before the American Revolution. And again, their guesses are quite meaningful and interesting, and a lot of historical debate took place at that point. And another point we should make here, another section, is that game jams are events. So if you're having a game jam at a library or after school club or on a weekend, it's important to feed the people that are there. It's also, as us, from our point of view as coordinators, we found that it was important to keep a collaborative document, like a Google Doc. Otherwise, the 4 groups that will come in that Saturday to run their stations might all have Scratch from MIT, the coding application, or they might all have something similar. We want to give kids lots of choices, so we had to encourage that each of the groups coming in to assist with design tools had something different, maybe something more advanced. We always tried to have an analog or paper-based game station in also. That way students can have a lot of choice, opportunity to explore interests or things that they want to maybe challenge themselves on as well. So we started off with an activity, a warm-up also. So this is one where we had different games like hacking tic-tac-toe, or headbands, which is like a reverse charades game, and giving kids an opportunity to play a very light and simple party game, and then have a chance to modify it and change it. That way they're getting in a playful mindset. I've done this in the classroom also, using simple games. Theater games work really well also, like Yes and, which is an improv game where you say something ridiculous and the next person in a circle says yes and a monster jumped out of a garbage can, and somebody else continues with the story.
And the garbage can was in my backyard.
Exactly. Because you want to get kids in this playful mindset or illusory attitude, because that's when you are psychologically more receptive to learning, even if it's silly. Plus, we want to make sure students understand the language and vocabulary of games, because you can't just say, okay, now go make a game, video game or an analog game, without giving any of the fundamentals. It's like if you ran into somebody who's never seen a book before and asked them to write a book, they need to know which way to turn the pages or how the chapters work or where the page numbers go, right? So we need a simple overview of how games are actually running and how they work. Kevin?
Yeah. And so just to show a few more slides of what it looks like once we get into the open design time, as Matt said, there's lots of different activities here. Some are digital, some are analog. They often look very different, but there's some kind of similarities here. You can see there's a lot of student working together, collaborative work, a lot of facilitation rather than direct instruction. This shows one of the material tables for one of the game jam stations. This was Museum of the Moving Image, running one on making a board game from a popular movie that you know and love. The collection, there was no digital components at all. You're using paper materials to make a paper game. This is another activity. This one was, again, modifying, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the game in the moment here.
Dreamweaver, Theme Weavers.
Theme Weavers, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a game played with cards between kids, and you can see
Story Weavers, I'm sorry. Story Weavers.
Story Weavers. And so
Yeah.
you're weaving stories through playing cards on top of each other. Another very fun kind of analog game. It was very collaborative. Again, even when students were doing something digital and working on a computer, they would often all be looking at each other's work, seeing what they were working on. We'd encourage in the moment play testing with each other during these sessions. as a way to really engage a collaborative sharing atmosphere. And I think this is just a great example where you can see this is one of the events where there's actually quite a few mentors. You can see there's a few adults kind of watching student work and stepping in to help them when it felt necessary, but really just being a mentor, a guide, a facilitator to the students as they were doing this work. You can see that in a couple settings here. Again, this is a bunch of students working on a Scratch project with the mentor in the bottom left here. Kind of watching the students work and figuring out when to step in and when to offer a little guidance. So Alex, you want to take over here?
Yeah, so we're going to go into a deeper dive of what it's like to do some of these activities, give you a little bit more of an overview of a small sampling of some of the different things that you might encounter during this open design time. But before we do that, we're going to need to make sure that we're all on the same page with what a game is, right? So to answer the question, what exactly are games? There's one answer here, which is a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. That's kind of wordy and can be difficult to understand. So we want to break games down into their essential components. So these are all the various parts of a game. And really, as long as you have all of these items, you have a game. So
Alex, this is the slide, just so you know, sorry to cut in.
yeah.
It's cut off. Rules
Oh,
are
yeah,
missing.
rules is missing. Yeah, so that should be the
Who can forget
final
rules?
thing. Although rules are probably the most familiar part of a game to most people, right? So I'm gonna ask some questions, and feel free to answer them in the chat if you think you know the answer. We're going to use tic-tac-toe as an example here. So all games have some sort of goal that's trying to reach that quantifiable outcome. So some sort of win condition. So the goal of tic-tac-toe is to have 3 of the same symbol in a row, right? It's pretty simple. The space is the actual location that the game is being played. That's a pretty simple question, but can anyone tell me what the space of tic-tac-toe is? It's a very specifically defined space, actually.
And these are questions that we ask participants at
Yeah.
the Game Jam events.
Yeah, exactly. It's this grid here. It's a 3x3 grid. Exactly. Thank you, Bron.
Nobody said hashtag?
Yeah, that's something that students sometimes say. So the space is the environment in which the game is played. The core mechanics are the actions that you are able to take in the game. You can often think of core mechanics as the verbs that you do in a game. So would anyone like to take a guess at what the core mechanic of strategy is? Strategy and making a line are really good guesses. But we're really looking for the verb. Yes, exactly. Thank you again, Prawn. It's the placement or the drawing or the creation of an X or an O, but it's the actual the thing you are able to do on your turn is you get one action, and that action is to place a symbol in one of the various positions on the grid. Right.
Strategy might fall under challenge. Sometimes that's in a list of parts of games too.
Yeah.
Challenge against the other player. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, to just respond to what's going on in the chat real quick, I've used basketball as an analogy a lot when doing this kind of overview of the parts of a game. In that you might think of the core mechanic is shooting, although there's other mechanics that are involved in a game like basketball. The core mechanics being the primary things that you do. For example, the way that you're able to win basketball is by getting the most points. How do you do that? It's by getting baskets. So shooting baskets is the core mechanic, but there's other important specific verbs for basketball like dribbling or passing. that are other things that you do that are part of the game. But this this concept of mechanics is really a focus on actions and sort of what are the different choices that you can what are the different actions you can choose to do in the game. Finally, well, there's two more rather. Components are all of the various pieces of the game. For example, in tic-tac-toe, we have the space, that's the grid, but there's two other major components that are a part of the game. If anyone wants to take a guess as to that. This has been said before in the chat in other forms. I'll just, for the sake of time, move forward a little bit. But so in tic-tac-toe, this would be the X's and the O's, the different symbols. Oh yeah, and in a game like basketball, you could say that different components include the basketball itself, as well as the team members, and the different, perhaps the referee as well. But it's all of the different things that come as a part of the game. And then finally, rules define what you can and cannot do in a game, and inform the mechanics and how you're able, how the components are able to interact with the space, and usually add some sort of amount of challenge that makes it difficult to reach your goal. So, any questions about these parts of a game before we move on?
Oh, I was just going to say, this is, we showed the definition. This has been like a really nice framework when we're talking about the system of a game with kids, to break down what that system is and to have them think about those components. And this is kind of a set of vocabulary words that can apply across any games, sports, board games, card games, digital games. And it creates a common reference point that's really nice when we've been running our events.
And as educators, when you look for games to adapt into a classroom, look at the core mechanics, not just the narrative of the game, not just what you're doing or where a game is set, where it takes place, and the core mechanics or actions of what you do in the game. So if you're doing a game that is like bingo, where you're just identifying, that's really low on Bloom's taxonomy, because games use verbs as core mechanics, just as Bloom's taxonomy in writing objectives and lesson plans do. So it's best to look for games that align higher order thinking from players and that use, that incorporate skills you may want students to use. And on the next slide.
Wait, before we move on, if I can jump in with one last thing about this, just with this framework, and because I really can't stress enough what Kevin just said about how this framework can really be used to apply to any game, and that this is really helpful. Can set you up a little bit, but for when talking about modifying games or hacking existing games, this framework is really helpful for being able to identify the different discrete components of that game, and then thinking, change one of these components and you can create an entirely different game. And that's something we do a lot. We would do at the MOVEABLE game jams in the intro session is to do some sort of hacking of tic-tac-toe, where the idea would be to pick one or two of these parts of the game and to really focus on changing those. So hopefully that was
Go ahead, Matt.
Sure.
I was just going to say, we're going to try something new next, which is to try one of our intro activities virtually. So we're going to play a game with you that we often have our students hack with us. And so I'll let Matt lead it. We'll see how this goes.
Thanks. Well, what we're doing is we're trying to use the feature of a chat, and I've been playing some games built into Facebook Messenger, and there are different ways you can actually use the constraints. So rules are also a system of constraints, and in a video game, you learn. Part of the fun of playing it is learning the constraints and where you can pour out into that rule set. But a paper-based game or an analog game, it's really constrained by the rules that are enforced socially by the players. So this is a particularly interesting one. It's developed by the Institute of Play, and in face-to-face, I would be standing on a stage, right? And then I would describe this picture. So if you have paper in front of you, that would help. We're going to play round one, and I'm going to describe a picture to you, but I'm not going to say what it is. I will just say what the shapes are, okay? So we're going to do round one, and I won't reveal what it is. But if you know what it is, please write it in chat, okay? So ready? All right. So first draw a square, and then draw an equilateral triangle on top of the square that fits the entire length of the square. Then on the bottom of the square, draw a portrait style, not landscape, of a rectangle, and then draw a small circle in the middle of that rectangle. And if you know what I just described, type it in chat. Good. We have a couple of winners here. Good job. So to reveal, yes, that's a house. And by the way, the Institute of Play developed this as a way to learn about Cartesian planes and math. Sometimes it's called graph talk. Okay, so it's an interesting math game, and it's available also linked in our game guide. All right, now we're going to hack this, okay? So we're going to add a constraint. Now in a class, this is what we do. So we bring another child up. I'll be the child again because I have the slides. We need a new rule. So can somebody type in a new rule or a change, or add a rule or drop a rule is sometimes something we also suggest. Feel free to be cruel. What rule would you change in Picture Talk to make this different? Or just see what happens if you change the rule. Okay. All right. So that's the rules on the players, right?
Oh,
that's interesting.
Pen, I like that one.
Yeah, I like that too. Having to keep your pen on the thing the whole time.
That's a good
Okay.
one. Can't reference shapes.
That's a good one. Thanks, Rachel. All right. So we'll try that. Ready? Round two. So you can't draw, and I can't say actual shapes. I will try my best not to beat my head against my keyboard. Okay, so round two. I would like you to draw 4 connecting lines, and there are 4 angles. The top and bottom line are equal length, they're parallel, and the side 2 lines are not as long. Actually, don't draw it because you can't, right? Picture it in your mind. Go to your mind palace. On top of those 4 lines, on the very top line, just in a little bit on the right-hand side, you're going to draw the same shape, but much smaller. Okay? And then in the middle, there is something in the very middle of those 4 lines. There is something that is the shape of a pizza pie. And then inside of that is the shape of a smaller pizza pie. And that's all that I'm going to give you. Turtle talk, huh?
we may have hacked this game too difficult, which sometimes occurs in the game design process.
Yeah, not being able to say shapes made this really hard.
I find that kids frequently do this too. They'll make it extremely hard whenever they try to hack a game. Like when they make a choose your own adventure style game, it's always like, every node is like, you die, you lose.
It's not a pizza driving a bus. We're getting close to time here, so I'm gonna move reveal and move on.
Uh-oh.
It was a camera.
Whoa. A camera, yes. Yeah. And it was easy. Come on, guys.
It's so hard to.
So oh yeah. So this is a a simple game. It's a party game. Party games are really fun to hack and mod. Again, I mentioned Headbands, which is a commercial game where you have to guess what card is hanging on your head. And these are also fun because right away you've got a project-based learning activity where students could take the content and turn them into cards. And you're using a lot more higher order thinking using trying to guess than you would if you made a game like Memory, which is just a series of flashcards, right? So this concludes our little warm-up, and now we're going to do some game design for reals. And these are just examples of what's in the guide and what we've done.
Yeah, so just some I'll go through them as briefly as I possibly can, but these are examples of activities in the open design time. This is a Scratch remix activity. It was for the theme of climate change. The concept was that there was the prompt was that the mayor of a city has banned carpooling services, and so they've created a game that is supposed to show the impact of carpooling services. This game looks like this, and students would remix this using Scratch, which would allow them to very easily change the art or change the code that's in here. And this would be to change this into a game that shows the value of carpooling for saving gas. So Scratch remixes are a popular type of game. Another great sort of example of a game making activity we'd have is with Twine, which was mentioned before. Twine is a tool that allows you to make digital choose your own adventure games very easily. So you'll read a little paragraph or look at an image that tells you about the situation that you're in, and you'll have a series of choices. And as you choose those choices, you have different outcomes. So this was a game that Mouse developed where is also for the climate change theme, where you are the mayor of New York City in the future, and you've been given a time machine so you can go back in time and create some sort of campaign to help prevent climate change from taking place. Here's a quick little GIF of what going through that game kind of looks like. So you know, this moves kind of quickly, so hopefully it's not too disorienting. But you know, you're presented with a series of options, and depending on what you choose, that changes the direction of the game. We would create a template game that kind of left the student had sort of all the exposition for the story of the game, and then we would encourage them. This is an example of doing a Twine activity. You can see on the computer screens some of the nodes that are connected by lines that indicate where you can go in the story. And so we would.
And you could see Alex
you
there.
can see me doing this. This was at the Museum of the Modern Moving Image, I believe. And so we gave them the start of the story where you had this time machine and the ability to go back, but then it was up to the students to create a story of what is it that happens when you go back in time and how do you confront climate change.
Yeah, and I'll just run through one or two. Also, this is another example of a totally analog game we did in the breakout model. So students were designing a breakout set, and this was in the Immigrant Voices theme. And so it was thinking about puzzles and challenges that fit into the theme of problems and issues that immigrants would face. And there were some really great challenges that were around navigating an unfriendly environment or dealing with language that wasn't familiar to you, that fit very well into this kind of breakout structure. That's an image of some kids playtesting and trying to solve the breakout puzzle there based on some notes that were written.
Okay, let me unshare my screen so I can bring it back to you.
No problem.
A few slides back.
And so the last example here is one from the Museum of the Moving Image called Brick Breakers. And this was a sort of visual analog split where kids were designing a game that in their minds and then creating a stop motion video on a screen of how that game would play out based on the core mechanics and rules that they were embedding. And so the result was one collaborative stop motion video that all the kids made for their game being played. And the video here, unfortunately, won't play either. It's been kind of, it was a little finicky to get the videos to play here, but this was the actual stop motion video that the kids came up with in this session from the theme of the classic Brick Breaker game here. So it's an example of some of the different activities we have here. And I'm just going to skip to this last slide here to say that what we have is we've compiled everything we've learned into something we're calling the Game Jam Guide, which is available on the ETC Press for free. It contains
the links on the next slide,
bunch of
too.
different. Yes. Yeah, and there is the link for it. And so this contains a description of a lot what we talked about here and a lot of the reasoning that we did and did not have time to go into, as well as all the activities we've developed and different things that you can either use to run your own game jam in your school setting or after school setting in any way you would want to adapt. And so it's kind of compiling everything we did into this free, usable resource.
Alex, your name got cut off.
Oh yeah. Well, you can find me at alex@mouse.org is probably the easiest way to get in contact since it's cut off there.
And the link is in chat because for some reason there's an extra space that was put in after game before jam. So follow the link there, or just look us up on ETC Press as the Game Jam Guide. It's a totally free PDF, and it's designed like lesson plans. Very easy to read and follow.
All right, I guess that wraps it up. Thank you, Kevin, Alex, and Matthew. This session has been recorded, and we'll have that edited and up for everyone to see and to share with their colleagues within the next 72 hours. And if you have any questions regarding BrainPOP, you can always email us at info@brainpop.com or educators@brainpop.com. And if you have any questions with what you heard about today, please feel free to email Kevin, Matthew, or Alex. We have their emails up, and we'll definitely be posting those for you to share and to get in contact with. Thanks, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.